morning. Thank you so much for getting here before noon, after last night being such a good night. So I'm Becky Stuart, and my slides are auto-advancing. Let's get that. Let's see. I might need assistance with the German. That is this computer. Just full screen and not to autoplay. There we go. We will conquer the technology. Okay, say hi. Yeah, good morning again. I've had my coffee. Have you had yours? I'm Becky Stuart, and this is an interesting month for me. So this is my the end of my 9th year of being in Europe, being in the UK. And I think a lot of people are always like, oh, why would you leave the US? Usually people want to go there, and I think a lot of it's the exchange. You always want to go where you don't grow up. But it gets exasperated a little bit when this is where I was before I went to the UK. And so most people are like, oh, the palm trees, it's really great. And when I first moved to the UK, it was just, distinctly fewer palm trees. So this is the University of York. But what took me to, I didn't grow up in Miami, but what took me to Miami was the University of Miami, where I studied music engineering. So my dream was to become a recording studio engineer. And I found these photos online, which are, they look amazingly old, but they're not that old. It's that way that technology looks really dated really quickly. These were from probably the late 90s, which I guess was a little bit a while ago. So this was where I spent a lot of my time, was in our recording studio in my course at Miami. And we had it was a really amazing recording studio for the time, state of the art. That it looks vintage now, but we had a recording studio where we could. It was classes during the day, and then 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. was when you could book out the time as a student to do your own projects and spend your own time in the studio. And so I maxed out you had so many hours you were allowed to do a term, and I maxed them all out every term. I loved it so much. And a large part of it was because the University of Miami has one of the best jazz programs in the US. So the students, the caliber of musician you're just surrounded with is amazing. So like the house parties, oh God, the house parties were amazing. Like just the random people in the corner playing in the band was like, people would be paying a lot of money to go see this music. Amazing musicians. And I learned very quickly, if you are a technologist, like an engineer, recording engineer, working with a really good musician, well, it's really easy to make really good things. Putting a microphone in front of a really talented musician is so much easier to make a really good recording than putting it in front of a kind of mediocre one. And I think it was really the beginning of learning that collaborations with really talented, creative people was something I loved doing. I didn't end up kind of staying in the recording field. Various things caught my eye, and in particular, I really enjoyed the programming aspect and the writing code for audio, for software. And that's what took me to the UK. And that's what took me to the University of York first, which is this tiny, lovely town. I recommend it for a weekend in the north of the UK. And then I ended up in London, at Queen Mary, University of London, where I did my PhD. And I got to spend time in rooms kind of like this. It's a little bit hard to see. This was the heart of the university, of the original kind of building of the university called the Octagon. And this is a library, which you could probably guess had 8 walls. And really beautiful room. And so I was studying reverberation and how sound propagates throughout spaces, and how musicians and artists who want to use reverb inside their work could have more accurate, more rich reverberation, artificial reverberation inside their music in kind of real-time interactive ways that weren't possible before. And so that's what I spent a lot of my time doing. And so I did a PhD at Queen Mary in the department. It was the Department of Electronic Engineering at the time. And what they don't really tell you about PhDs, because they seem like these beautiful, lofty things, is they're incredibly lonely. You spend so much time spending so much time on a problem that really not that many other people in the world kind of care about in a lot of detail. And you go to conferences and you meet the other people who really care about that problem with you, but otherwise you're kind of in a group of other people who all really care a lot about a problem you don't care about as much. And so by the end of the process, I was really hungry to actually kind of interact with the world again. And so a colleague of mine who did his PhD with me, we set up a company called Codasign. And we had both done a lot of collaborations throughout our research studies with artists and designers in which we were kind of, the tech half of an artist-tech duo. And we realized a lot of artists really wanted to work with technology and didn't want to have to always necessarily collaborate, or at least be able to express their ideas a little bit more with the technology before bringing on a team, a chance to, kind of think things through, sketch things out. Work with tools themselves before having to, be like, okay, now I'm ready to take this to someone else and kind of see if this project has legs. And so we set up a company that teaches workshops. So we work with a lot of artists and designers, maybe people who come from maybe still graphics that want to do interactive graphics, or a lot of artists who, hear what Arduino is a word, and sometimes it gets used as a verb. Oh, that project needs an Arduino, that you just need to Arduino that project. And so we would kind of help teach, well, what does that mean? How do you work with microcontrollers? How do you code? How do you program? And so it's grown a bit, and so Adam stepped back a little bit, and Emily Giles, who you can't really see in any of these photos, is leading it with me, and we have a bunch more instructors and kind of a whole group of us who are all artists or researchers or musicians who also really love teaching as well and working with people. So of course we teach things like Arduino, so all the way from kind of kids up through artists and designers who are adults. And then in something that really kind of corresponds with this weekend is we do a lot of work with soft circuits. So whether you kind of knew what soft circuits were before or not coming this weekend, if you were at the party last night or at the workshops yesterday, you might be much more exposed to what they are now. So the idea that traditional circuits, kind of the way your phone is made out of really hard things that don't, if you were to bend it, like perhaps some famous iPhone videos, it will eventually snap and not work, instead of having something be soft. And that would bend and flex and kind of move with you. And so this is where the idea of soft circuits come from. So it's using materials like thread that has metal in it, so you can sew circuits, and you don't have to just use hard, brittle things, but things that can bend and move with the body. You can kind of, and so this is that's a hand. And so this is one of our projects we like to do for just a really quick introduction. So it's just a little piece of felt that you cut out in the shape of a robot. And you do a really simple LED, exactly what you had on the badges last night. You have an LED, or two LEDs for two eyes, and a battery to light it up, to kind of just demonstrate how you can make your own circuit and kind of have control over electricity, which is can be really empowering if, especially, you came from a background where you were kind of told you're not very good at the engineering, you're not good at the math, you should maybe stick to the arts and the humanities, you're not so good at the tech side. Or even if someone didn't tell you that, you maybe felt it yourself. And bringing new materials to the process can help open up and realize, oh, you know what? When this is explained in a way that I know how to relate to, I can do the technology, I can do the interactive bits of things. I maybe don't always have to rely on someone else to bring that part to a project. And then another thing we like to work with a lot is conductive paint. So this is particularly from a company in London, just kind of down the street from where we are, called Bear Conductive. And so conductive paint's been around for a while. What's really nice about this paint is it's much cheaper than a lot of conductive paints cost. So conductive paint is kind of what it says on the tin. It is paint that conducts electricity. So you can paint circuits. So now you can sew circuits, you can paint circuits, you also can solder circuits. The painting is really fun, and also a really nice way to get kids involved and get younger age groups to interact with technology in a really safe way. Because there's certain 7-year-olds you don't really want to hand a soldering iron to. Paintbrush and some very water-soluble, washable paint, you feel more comfortable with that. And so this is working with the paint. And so just some examples of how that's worked in practice. This was with a school group at a local school in Hackney, in which this is using, you can kind of see it in this picture. So this is using thermochromic paints, so it's starting to use kind of smarter material, what gets called smart materials. So it's paint that just changes colors at a different temperature, or more of goes transparent. So you can kind of see where his finger was here, is where the orange is disappearing. And so they made a 16 squares of a kind of fictionalized landscape of London. Using the paint, and they learned how to program Arduinos in order to activate heating circuits to make the picture change. And the piece was called Reveal. And this is one of our instructors, Melissa Coleman, who also does the most amazing wearable things. You should certainly look her up if you're not familiar with her as well. And so this is her working with a group of young people at the Tate Modern, their young people's program called the Tate Lab. And so she was teaching them soft circuit, kind of soft sensor techniques and how to make their own sensors, doing a lot of things that we did in the workshops yesterday. So I never really liked the electronics when I actually studied it. So when I had it formally in school, so in Miami, you had to choose a path. So along with the recording engineering, you had to do either computer science or electrical engineering. So you take your first the first class of each of those paths, and then you choose which one. And so I took the intro programming. It's like, okay, this is okay. I took programming in high school, and I hated it. Took it again in university. I was like, okay, I could maybe do this. Circuit theory, the beginning, which is the first step of learning how to do electronics in any kind of university setting, hated it. Terrible. Circuit theory is terrible. And it's my worst marks I've ever gotten in any class. And you just sit and you do equations. You don't touch anything when you start beginning kind of university level electronics. And so it's like, no, screw that. I'm going to go with the computer science part. So sometime during my PhD, it was kind of when Arduino got really big. And Arduino started getting combined with things like crafts. And so I'd always crafted at home. I learned from my mom how to sew, how to knit. I knew how to use a sewing machine at the same time I was learning piano lessons in second grade, just kind of the household I was in. And so I decided to kind of start playing around with Arduino, and that was kind of my pathway back into the electronics. It wasn't actually any of the formal engineering that I had, and the fact that I kind of ended up in a PhD department doing in electrical engineering was completely by chance. And it was really almost after all of those studies that I was like, I actually like this electronics thing. So this was one of the first projects I did. I think it was one of the first completed Arduino projects I did. And I have a little video. So it's a knit pig. So that was just it turning on. And so the knitting pattern's from an artist based in Brooklyn who has these great kind of book and knitting patterns that I adopted. So this is her pig with wigs. Caught in a bad romance. This also dates this project a lot. So each of the wigs plays a different tune in the pig. Just a really silly, kind of simple kind of project. And so there's just 3 different sets of snaps, and each wig just hooks on to different ones, and whichever snaps close the circuit, that's the song that plays. So that was Lady Gaga, Bad Romance. Any guesses as to this one? She no longer has the $sign in her name. This is TikTok by Kesha. When you take pop music and put it into these monotone kind of little songs, it's actually really hard to, they all sound the same. And this last one in particular is really hard to name the tune from. This is Nicki Minaj. Super bass. Sufficient enough that I haven't gotten any takedown notices for the audio being on the online. So that was my first kind of foray into working with kind of Arduino inside a textile space. And now I have to redo. There we go. So I ended up alongside Codasign, kind of pursuing my own projects, mostly through collaboration. So the pig one, I won't force anyone else to take any credit for that but me. That was me that came up with putting wigs on a pig and making it sing different songs. But then I've kind of carrying on from what I kind of realized in the recording studio, collaborating with creative individuals who had really amazing ideas, I found really, really rewarding. And so this was a project which looks like a black screen. So this was a project by Trust. So this was a jacket made by so it was just a couture item made by a designer in Montreal, Radhurani, and we embedded 8 cameras, hacked PS3Is, into the jacket so that when it was worn by a musician while performing, particularly kind of like an electronic musician, the viewpoint of the musician could be viewed and projected on the walls around. And part of the kind of the aesthetic of it was to be intentionally CCTV feeling, so it was black and white, really grainy, and not great kind of video fidelity. So this was worn by an artist, Jacques Green, at the, sorry, let me find the beginning of the video here. At a performance. At a performance in the South Tank at the Tate Modern about a year and a half ago So that was a highly stylized video that only kind of translated to the projector a little bit. So that was, so Jacques Green wore it while performing a set at the Tate Modern. And then and kind of probably a favorite project of mine, I worked with Dominic Wilcox, who is an artist and designer. He doesn't really like to put himself into like a labeled box very well, but he comes up with these amazing twists on what kind of everyday objects could be with a little bit of an enhancement, a little bit of a change to them. And so he came up with the concept of what if you had shoes that he called the No Place Like Home shoes that were inspired by the Wizard of Oz. So you click the heels together 3 times and they show you how to get home. So they have LEDs embedded into the front of each shoe. One being a kind of the direction, like a compass, the other one being a bit more of a progress bar.
I'm Dominic Wilcox. I'm an artist and designer based in London. I was commissioned to create a pair of shoes for the Global Footprint project in Northamptonshire. And Northamptonshire is very famous for the shoemaking tradition in the past. I could make whatever shoes I wanted, and I started to think about the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy and her shoes, and when she clicked her heels together, she got transported home. And so I used that as sort of inspiration and thinking, well, is it possible to make a pair of shoes that could at least guide you home? So I did a little doodles and drawings and sketches and worked out some sort of design and how it would work, how these shoes would work. And then the next challenge is to find someone to make it, both the technology side and the shoemaking side. So I went back to Northamptonshire and I found a local shoemaker there called Stamp Shoes, and they made the shoes, and also Becky Stuart here, who did the technology side. This shoe actually wirelessly communicates with this left shoe, because here we've got the direction, but on this shoe we've got the distance. Here we've got a circle of LED lights and a one in the centre. The one in the centre is on when there's a satellite connection, and the LED lights illuminate to point in the direction that you should be travelling. And then on the back here, this is where there's a GPS embedded in the heel here. So this is all hollowed out, and then this little red thing on the back here, that's the antenna. So that's pointing upwards to the satellites. To start up the GPS, we've got a little switch inside the shoes, which allows to detect clicking of the heels. So you click the heels together, and that starts up the GPS. It then looks for the satellite signal. I've called it No Place Like Home, after Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz.
So a really fun part of that project was more than it just being, so there's the working with really, talented artist and designer on a project, but it was also working with, really old school craft of cobbling, of making shoes, and getting to work with someone who still makes leather shoes by hand and seeing that process. And I think the thing I learned the most from it is like really nicely made, handmade leather shoes are born out of violence. It is a very violent process that involves a lot of hammers, a lot of nails, and a lot of chemical to kind of force, animal skin into the shape that would go around your foot nicely. But it was just, the concept, the poetry of the concept is really what makes the piece. It was really a pleasure to do. So I thought I'd talk a little bit, for those who weren't here yesterday, about what we did for a workshop. I don't have any photos of it, so right now it's white screen, but I have a physical object in front of me. And so yesterday I wanted to come up with a workshop that could introduce someone who comes from more of a textile background to how you work with soft circuits, with electricity. And for me, I do this quite a bit, and usually involves LEDs and sewing LED circuits, just because it's such an easy win. It's obvious when it goes right. It's not particularly complicated. But I kind of, a little bit out of just kind of personal boredom a little bit, but also that not everything needs an LED, I really wanted to come up with a project that would involve something besides just lights. And so what we made yesterday, we called the Solo Disco Scarf. So this was a scarf where you plug in, at the bottom there, you plug in your phone, your music player, and at the top you plug in your headphones. So it kind of sits between your music player and your headphones. And it then, with this switch, so that little thing hanging down, when you touch different places on the scarf, it will change the music. So it will either make the music come out only the left ear, only the right ear, or out of the middle, out of the center, playing over both ears at the same time. So a really simple interaction, and perhaps not something you really want to do with your music all the time, but something, as much as you would want to wear around a flashy LED all the time, I guess is about as useful as that. Good for special occasions. And so this is what we made yesterday. Had a lot of fun with it. And I think one of my favorite parts is, in the circuit, this is an audio mixer. So this, two pieces of lines of stitching, that's a stereo to mono audio mixer. And so I think when you kind of bring something down to its simple parts like that, so you have, your left and right would go in there, and your mono signal would come out the other side. When you start breaking apart the technology, breaking apart what happens inside of black boxes, things that we buy from shops, and kind of realizing there's not that much to it, that there's something that you could take a sewing machine or even a hand, needle in hand, and you can, create the same technology on a piece of cloth. I think there's something really quite powerful in that, and so that's what we did yesterday. I thought I'd share a little bit for those who weren't here, or who were having lots of fun doing the two other amazing workshops. It was really hard to stay in one room yesterday. You just wanted to go to all the different things. It was all great. Cool, so that brings a little bit more kind of current day. So this is an ongoing project that I've been working with Di Mainstone. So Di is English, but she spent a fair bit of time in New York a couple years ago at artist center, I guess, called I-Beam. And when she was doing a residency at I-Beam, her daily commute was going across the Brooklyn Bridge. And she was really inspired by the architecture of it. She's a wonderful artist, and so she takes inspiration from lots of things, but it was the footsteps and the sounds of the bridge and the people going past, and the fact that the suspension bridges have this harp-like structure. And so she wanted to think about how could you play a piece of architecture like a suspension bridge, like a harp? How could you bring a bridge down to human scale? And so she started the project, A Human Harp, which was, it's been going on for about 2.5 years now, which is really great. A lot of projects don't get that kind of longevity. You don't always get to see the behind the scenes, perhaps, if you kind of go see installed artworks in places, but there's usually a lot of it wasn't working until about 40 minutes before you walked in the room. Is really a lot of the way a lot of these pieces work. And having such a long period of time to work on a piece is really great. We really do get to iterate and make something that's a little bit more kind of robust and things that are kind of great to share. Sometimes people criticize that not all art gets kind of shared in an open way. Well, sometimes it's because it's not best practice of what you've been doing. You've been hacking all kinds of stuff, and it's not really things that you want everyone else to see. And so getting to work on something and everything that we do with the Human Harp is open, and will be not greatly documented yet, but will be documented and released so that you can kind of take everything that we do and use it in something else. So there you go. So the Creators Project filmed this. It was April, not this year, April 2013. So the idea is you, as Di calls them musicians, so they move and they create the music, and so musician. And so they wear a harness, and working with historical structures like Brooklyn Bridge or other historical suspension bridges, you have to do a really leave no trace that you were there at the end of an installation kind of piece. And everything needs to kind of be, interacting with the architecture needs to have absolutely no damage whatsoever to the building, to the structure. And so we made these modules. I'll show you a picture after the video, that you kind of connect those to the bridge. You'll see them in the video. And then it's a string. And so the string then you can attach to yourself wearing a harness like this. And then as the dancer moves, the data generated from that string being pulled out and in and at different angles is then what causes the sound to be generated from the piece. So this was the kind of the first version of it. This is an instrument. This is clipped to a bridge. The subtitles here. Pull the cord, release the sound. Clip to you. So that was kind of the first piece for how it, kind of how the first version worked. So these were the modules. So we had 8 of them for the first ones. So out the front here, so that's where the string would come out. And they weren't wireless, and to kind of simplify the system. And the first kind of questions were, what would be the interface? If you were to play a bridge, how would you as a human interact with it? And so we were looking at, if you have a string, is that a good way? How would you attach the strings to yourself? How do you attach the other end of the string to the bridge? and then just kind of synthesize sounds that would come from that data. A year and a bit on, oh, sorry, let me talk about all the people. So it's a huge project. So the first version, I did all of the hardware design and a bit of the middleware, code writing, and then Adam Stark, who's in the front here, he did all the software side and the audio generation. He's a brilliant musician, and so he created all the sounds that you'd interact with. It's Di, Holly, and then we're in John Newsey's studio doing the build before they all got flown out to New York. Oh, Leah got cut off. But we had industrial designers, product designers who helped with the kind of the object manufacture. John helped with the build. Holly and Di again. So quite a big group of people. And what we realized is it's a very complicated project. And so this past June, we brought on even more people. And so we brought on specialists in networking and electrical engineers. So Seb Madgwick from XIO has a really wonderful device called an SGOSC, where it sits on Wi-Fi networks and can pass around OSC packets really, really easily. And so that's the new version. A new set of modules all got built with that for a residency in the Roundhouse that we had this past August. So the Roundhouse is a venue in North London that used to be a Victorian train building. So it's kind of a big round building, kind of a big turntable in the center. And the trains would come in from one direction, turntable would turn it to another direction, and the train could go back out to kind of change what track it was going on. And so kind of big, beautiful building that we got to spend a month interacting with the public and doing performances and installations. So this was one of the rehearsals with 3 of the dancers doing the installation. And so we brought on, we have an additional person doing the audio generation. We were starting to harvest sounds from the building itself, so not just synthesized sounds, but actually recording impacts on the columns and using that as the sound that you interact with. Let me see a little bit about the new hardware. So that's the Roundhouse. Just largely, so the new harness system and waiting for a picture of the new hardware. Those are the new modules that you can see on the table. Oh, you can see it on the computer. You can't see it in the screen. So there's these new, they're actually hacked dog leads. So we have an official sponsorship from FlexiLead, which are a dog lead company. And so they supply us with dog leads that we put sensors on. So we now can measure to, I think, 10 micrometers how far out a string is, and to like 1/10 of a degree, the angle is the data we have. So we can pull it out, we can pull the string out about 10 meters. You can pluck it, like just pull it and release it, and the computer can detect that movement. So the kind of the fidelity of the system is really great. And just to get, there's kind of a close-up, but a bit dark, of the modules. And then seeing that in use a little bit. Oh, am I going through here?
I will. Sorry. Are you okay? Yes.
Yeah, cool.
Now it's okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
you're okay. Yeah. Okay. Because this is.
It takes a really long time to put the harnesses on, so I'm going to speed this up a little. You can't see much, but you can at least hear kind of the new sounds being generated. Okay. So kind of the next stage of the project will be is actually in real time. So we have these strings that we can put on a bridge that don't do anything to harm the bridge, that can interact and be really sensitive ways to kind of interact with a computer that knows what's going on. And so the next part is going to be actually kind of making the bridge vibrate, capturing the vibrations of the bridge. So when you pluck a harp, you kind of pluck a string, and then you hear that string being resonated through the body of the harp, and then you hear the beautiful sound. And so it's now going to be